better turnout.
Can I start, or is there anyone else we're waiting for?
I think we're all set.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we're going to get started, so if everyone could take their seats. Good evening. My name is Susan Kohlmann, and I am the president of the New York City Bar Association. It is our honor and privilege, along with the Historical Society of the New York Courts, to co-host the Honorable Kniaziev, President and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Ukraine. As a bar association that was founded over 150 years ago to protect the principles of fair justice and the rule of law, and whose attention and reach have long extended beyond our shores, the City Bar has been observing and commenting on the Russian Federation's illegal war on the sovereign nation of Ukraine from its outset. The day after the Russian Federation invaded Ukraine, we issued a statement condemning that flagrant act of aggression in violation of international law and the Charter of the United Nations. The following month, we urged the prompt investigation of potential war crimes by the Russian Federation, calling for an ad hoc tribunal to be created by the United Nations and the government of Ukraine on the crime of aggression. We also urged the United Nations Human Rights Council to find the Russian Federation in violation of its obligations to respect freedom of expression, opinion, and the press, and the International Criminal Court to include any war crimes that may have been committed against journalists in their investigations. Last May, we urged President Biden and U.S. congressional leaders to abandon our nation's reluctance to support the ICC so that the escalating pattern of war crimes in Ukraine could be properly investigated, adjudicated, and sanctioned. And we reiterated that just this month, urging President Biden to place protection of the rule of law over lingering concerns from some quarters in the U.S. about providing the fullest possible assistance to the ICC. We have called the Russian Federation's blatant violation of the fundamental principles and purpose of the United Nations Charter a pivotal moment for international law and the rules-based international order, adding that the failure to ensure accountability would signal to perpetrators of atrocities around the globe the destruction of restraints against illegal acts of violence as a means to achieve political goals. Last October, we unequivocally rejected and strongly condemned the illegitimate referenda and illegal annexation of Ukrainian territories by the Russian Federation as contrary to Russia's obligations under the Charter of the United Nations, the final act of the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, and numerous other legal instruments to which both Russia and Ukraine are parties. We are so appreciative of the Chief Justice's willingness to be here and speak with us this evening. In the comfort of this historic building, we have been in awe of your country's fortitude. I understand you became Chief Justice just 1 month before the invasion began, and now, as a wartime Chief Justice, Ukrainian prosecutors are investigating 80,000 alleged war crimes, and there are 21 cases that have already resulted in convictions. We are worried about the rule of law in our own country, but you are faced with maintaining the rule of law in wartime. It is unimaginable. Benjamin Ferencz, the last surviving Nuremberg prosecutor who recently died, repeatedly said, the world should turn away from using force in general and rely on courts of law instead. Our promise here tonight is that the New York City Bar Association will continue to bear witness and seek opportunities to support the sovereign nation of Ukraine in its existential struggle to maintain its independence, maintain the rule of law, and seek justice. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce the Honorable Jonathan Lippman, former Chief Judge of the State of New York and current President of the Historical Society of the New York Courts, and our very own Vice President of the New York City Bar Association.
Good evening. I want to thank the City Bar Association and Susan Kohlmann for giving us this beautiful venue to have the Chief Justice here and to jointly with us sponsor this great event. As president of the Historical Society of the Courts, I truly want to welcome all of you and make sort of a statement as to the purpose of the Historical Society, which is to preserve, protect, and promote the legal history of New York and demonstrate how it works to promote democracy, ensure justice, and promote the rule of law. In that context, it is particularly an honor and a privilege for us to welcome Chief Justice Kniaziev and the other members of the Ukraine delegation here to New York on behalf of the Historical Society and the New York State Judiciary. The Chief Judge and the Ukrainian judiciary are in every way promoting democracy, justice, and the rule of law in the most difficult of circumstances, operating a court system under wartime conditions. And we have had so many challenges here in operating the court system, whether it be after 9/11, whether it be the pandemic, all of the things that I know personally, have made it so difficult to keep the judiciary as the beacon of hope, of the law, of democracy. And here they are, the Ukrainian judiciary, in the midst of this war that affects them every day. And I asked the Chief Justice when we were talking outside, is everything pretty, okay in Kyiv, sort of normal? And he says, if you accept, the craziness that's gone on, yes, it's about the same as it's been for the last period of time, but normal by no means. And we in the Historical Society salute the Chief Justice, and the Ukrainian judiciary for contributing to preserving democracy and the rule of law for all of us in this country. And as Susan said, yes, we have our challenges, but this is really something to behold and something that has won the admiration of the entire country and certainly of New York. We are greatly in your debt, Chief Justice, and we will, as a judiciary, as a legal community, do everything within our power now and in the future to support the fight for democracy that you are leading. It is also my pleasure, in addition to saying how just delighted the Historical Society is to have this evening for all of us to hear the Chief Justice. It's also my pleasure to now introduce Albert M. Rosenblatt, who was a former Associate Justice of the Judge of the New York Court of Appeals and President Emeritus of the Historical Society. Judge Rosenblatt is our esteemed co-founder with my predecessor, Judith Kay, of the Historical Society, and we are also in his debt for his inspirational leadership, his commitment to the history of the New York courts, and to the Historical Society he so loves. Judge Rosenblatt, Al, thank you for all you've done for the Historical Society and for your instrumental role with Judge Walker in bringing Chief Justice Kniaziev to be with us tonight. Al, come on up.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We've been putting on programs here for a number of years. It's not usual that we get this great a turnout, and we're so happy that you all are here to welcome the judge and participate in what for us is one of the most stellar events we've ever had here. Over the years, we've had very good friends, but none better than Judge John Walker. Judge Walker is now sitting on the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. He was the former chief judge. And if it were not for him and his friendship with Judge Kniaziev, this would not have happened. It was in his role, in Judge Walker's role as advisor to the Conference of Chief Judges of Central and Eastern Europe that he got to know Judge Kniaziev, and we thank Judge Walker for bringing this about. And after the introductions, he and I will be seated down there having a conversation with the Chief Judge of Ukraine. John, thank you.
Thank you, Judge Rosenblatt, for your kind remarks and for your work in making this event possible. And thanks also to Susan Kohlmann, the president of the New York City Bar Association, and the former Chief Judge Jonathan Lippman, president of the New York Courts Historical Society, for hosting this event. The special thanks also goes to Marilyn Marcus, the executive director of the New York Courts Historical Society, for all of her work, and to her deputy, Allison Morey, and to her staff. As we know and read about every day, Ukraine is fighting for its very existence against the unprovoked military onslaught launched over a year ago by Russia. This is an existential war that's going on. And if you stop to think about it, the United States has had two existential wars, our Revolutionary War and our Civil War. And this war in Ukraine is of that magnitude and that significance to the people of Ukraine and also to the people of Europe and to all people who believe in a sound government under the rule of law, ordered liberty under the rule of law. Ukraine is a constitutional democracy, fully aligned with Western Europe in that regard, that aspires to perfect its adherence to the rule of law, and it has taken major steps in that direction, and we'll get into some of those tonight. Russia, however, is a totalitarian state that spurns democratic values and the rule of law, as it is commonly understood. So Ukraine is fighting not just for its own survival, but for the ideal of liberty under law, for the freedoms that we cherish, that are absent in Russia, and that the Ukrainians would lose if Russia were to succeed. The choice has not been so stark since World War II. Just before the Russian invasion, Putin gave a speech on February 21st. The invasion was on February 24th of last year. He gave a speech that condemned rule of law reforms in Ukraine as being under Western control. He specifically attacked the serious anti-corruption efforts underway in that country. It is evident to me, and I think to others, that Putin cannot abide the idea of a successful democracy under law that flourishes on Russia's southern border. Perhaps subconsciously, he fears that Ukraine's example could someday gain traction in Russia. Tonight, we are extraordinarily privileged to have as our honored guest and speaker, Vsevolod Kniaziev, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Ukraine, and I'll say a bit more about the Chief Justice in a minute. He's accompanied by Supreme Court Justice Vitaly Urkavich, who holds the important job of Secretary of the Grand Chamber of the Supreme Court. There are 4 chambers of the Supreme Court, civil, criminal, commercial, and administrative, and the Grand Chamber sits over them. It's sort of like a super in-bank court, as we would understand it. And the Secretary of the Grand Chamber makes that organization run, and he's the power behind the scenes of the Grand Chamber. It so happens that Chief Justice Kniaziev held that position before he became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So the Chief Justice and Justice Urkavich are accompanied here by their wives, Julia Kniaziev and Olena Yurkevich. The delegation is completed by my good friend, Lena Hubar, who is the head of the Supreme Court's Division of International and Legal Cooperation, and whose work is essential in arranging an event of this sort and coordinating it with Ukraine. On this visit, the delegation is accompanied by David Vaughn, and David Vaughn is here. He represents USAID. David is a lawyer and a rule of law expert, and in recent years, he's worked in Ukraine. When David is not in, David is fluent in both Russian and Ukrainian, and I won't hold it against him at all that his hometown happens to be Mamaroneck, New York, and his family had Mamaroneck ties for over a century, really. I also want to recognize our wonderful Chief Judge of the Second Circuit, Deborah Livingston, and our colleagues on the court, Judges Danny Parker and Pierre Laval. Finally, I will say now a little bit more about our honored speaker. After practicing law for 13 years in Mykolaiv, and if you've studied your Ukrainian maps, and I think many of you have, because they're published all the time, and that's how we keep track of things over there. Mykolaiv is in the southern part of Ukraine. It's currently in Ukrainian control, but it's right close to the border, right near Kherson and right near the war-torn regions of the south, Mariupol and the other cities down there. But that's his home. He served as a judge for 3 years in Mykolaiv, and then was elevated to the Supreme Court of Ukraine in 2017. And he rose from the administrative chamber, one of the 4 chambers that I mentioned, to the Grand Chamber, which I mentioned a minute ago, and then after 4 years in that position, to the Chief Justiceship of the Supreme Court itself. The judges elect their leaders, and he never talks about it, but when he was elected, he received twice the number of votes of his next highest competitor. He took office in early 22, or December 21, but very early in 22, he was just getting his feet wet and getting under him, getting getting going with his job when the Russians invaded. So he has had to tackle a myriad of problems in Ukraine, as you can imagine. But I want to emphasize that he's accomplished all of this as a very young man. He's only 43 years old. I first met the Chief Justice last May in Prague at a conference of the Chief Justices of Central and Eastern Europe, and we've become friends. The occasion there was that conference, of which I'm the coordinator and advisor. The conference brings together the Chief Justices of the countries of Central and Eastern Europe once a year in different countries. And these are all countries that share in common the fact that they were liberated from communism at the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall, around that time. So they share a common past and they have common problems, notwithstanding the differences between the 22 countries that are involved. This conference was Chief Justice Kniaziev's first conference and his first trip outside of Ukraine following the Russian invasion 3 months earlier. He reported to our conference on the war's impact on the Ukrainian courts and on the progress of his judicial reform program. Now, a year later, he has more to share with us on the state of the Ukrainian courts in wartime, on the reform measures underway, and also on Ukraine's treatment of war crimes, how they're handling war crimes. So it's with great pleasure and a great honor that I give you my good friend, Vsevolod Kniaziev.
Thank you, Justices. Thank you, Justice Walker, for your kind presentation and introduction. Good evening, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor today for me to speak for such a distinguished audience. New York Bar Association, it sounds really great, really a great honor for me. Yes, first of all, let me start with a word of thanks, to all Americans, American government, American people, everyone who is helping Ukraine, supporting Ukraine, because the US is our most trusted ally. And without the help and the support of the United States, we will never stand in this war. So thank you once again, and please go on supporting Ukraine, because we need your solidarity, we need your support. Ukraine is fighting for its motherland. We are fighting for our families, for our children, for our lands. But Justice Walker absolutely rightly said that we are not fighting only for our motherland and for our country. Yes, we are fighting for democracy. We are fighting for the rule of law. We are fighting for the fair trial. Yes, that were the things which annoyed Russian government, annoyed Russian leaders. And really, in his speech before he started his aggressive invasion to Ukraine, leader of Russian Federation, President Putin, he just criticized the reforms in Ukraine aimed to the rule of law, aimed to independent judiciary and fighting the corruption. He criticized and made laugh of creating an anti-corruptional court and higher council of justice and all other reforms which he thinks are done with the Western control. But he could not understand that it was the choice of Ukraine. It was the choice of Ukraine for the democratic values, for the Western values, to be with the Western civilization and not to be with Russian corrupted regime. And that was the European aspiration of Ukraine, our desire to be with European Union, European integration, Euro-Atlantic integration, which annoyed Russia and which became the reason of that aggressive war. And now we are fighting very hard for our choice and for choice of all Ukrainians. The crimes which were done in Ukraine and destructions are tremendous. I just will start and tell some figures about the situation in Ukraine and how it influences the judiciary. Please, my English is far from perfect, so please excuse me, but I'll do my best to do it correct. So you see the current situation in Ukraine, 7.1 million refugees outside of Ukraine. Speaking about refugees, and I will return to this topic further in my speech, we also should speak about lawyers, also are refugees, and there is a lack of lawyers now in Ukraine because lots of them lost their homes, lost their houses, their offices, because they were completely demolished by Russian troops. 1.6 million people forcibly deported from Ukraine to Russian Federation, including 600,000 children deported. And you know that was the reason for which the ICC, the International Criminal Court, issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin for deporting Ukrainian children to the Russian Federation. 600,000 children taken away from their parents, from their families, from their brothers and sisters. Can we just forgive it? I think no. And further on about the war crimes done. More than 8,000 civilians killed, more than 40,000 civilians injured. I'm speaking also about other atrocities like tortures, like rapes and everything like this. Now we have 5.9 million internally displaced persons in Ukraine, just like 500 children killed during two missile attacks and just killed by Russian soldiers, sometimes just on fun. You can see these terrible pictures about the situation in Ukraine. Destroyed residential buildings and hotels. This is the Kyiv city center not long ago in October. And the shopping mall where there were thousands of people just hit by the Russian missile. Why did they do this? I don't know. And more pictures from Ukrainian civilian objects like residential houses, just shooting people just to make us to be afraid of Russians. And this is a hotel in the center of Kyiv where a lot of Ukrainians lived and a lot of people who came to Kyiv from other countries, and they meant it. So they had the aim to hit the foreign citizens who lived in the hotel in the center of Kyiv, just to prevent our partners, our friends from other countries to come to Kyiv. This is the situation. You see more residential buildings destroyed by Russian forces. On my own eyes, I saw those buildings when visiting the occupied territories. I saw the firemen who were just doing their work, trying to save the people who are under the parts of the building, deblocking the people and trying to save them. Thousands of people were killed. You see that by this time we have a lot of destruction in civil infrastructure, like 144,000 residential buildings destroyed, 209,000 educational institutions, including schools, including universities, including kindergartens and everything like this. Hospitals, more than 1,000 hospitals, cultural facilities, and vehicle stores, administrative buildings. Know that Russians also aimed energy supply facilities. That were their aims, not fighting with our soldiers, not fighting with our military. Every day they are hitting the civil objects. They're destroying museums, churches, universities. hospitals, children facilities, theaters, and everything like this. What for? You see, the Bakhmut was how it was before the Russians and what they have done by their artillery fire. You see that nothing left, just a burned ground. These are the satellite pictures from satellite. Speaking about crimes, war crimes committed during a full-scale war, I would say that there are more than 80,000 war crimes now registered according to the Prosecutor General information. These war crimes include, they are qualified by our prosecutors like breaking the laws and customs of war. But what does it mean? It means killing civilians, killing children, raping women, destroying civil houses, destroying hospitals, theaters, and everything like this. We have 80,000 war crimes registered now. In most of those cases, we do not have a suspect because nobody knows who has destroyed the house, who has killed the civilian. Only the corpses were found on the occupied territories, thousands of them, sometimes buried like 20 or 30 persons in one grave. And who did we? Certainly we do not know who has done it. So we register those cases and continue to investigate those cases. And we also thank the US Attorney General who helps us in this process, sending his prosecutors and creating the joint prosecutor team. American prosecutors and investigators help Ukraine to investigate the war crimes and to bring to the accountability those who are responsible for those crimes. But speaking about the war crimes, I cannot but mention the main war crime which was done, the crime of aggression, the crime of aggressive war. You know, aggressive war is prohibited according to UN Charter. Aggressive war is prohibited by Geneva Convention. Yes, the crime of aggressive war, I think, is the mother of all crimes. Because only when an aggressive war is started, all other war crimes may be done. So it's a very important thing to bring to accountability all those leaders who started an aggressive war. This is the President of Russian Federation, Putin, his military minister and Minister of External Affairs. Still, there is a problem in international law. It seems like now there is nobody in international community, no authority to bring to accountability a leader who starts an aggressive war, who has committed the crime of aggression. What do I mean? Because the ICC, the International Criminal Court, has no jurisdiction over the crime of aggression. It just cannot do anything with it. Ukrainian courts also cannot bring to justice the leaders of other countries like Putin because of their functional and personal immunity of the like a leader of another state. So it's also impossible. Well, there is no other body now to make Putin responsible for the crime of aggression. That is why Ukraine is now speaking with all the international partners worldwide, with the world community. We are discussing and we have an idea, and I would like everyone to support the idea and ask you to support the idea of creating a special ad hoc tribunal for bringing to accountability the leader who started an aggressive war. And this is not only a question for Ukraine and Russia. This is a question for the world community. Because if tomorrow or a year later, 5 years later, any leader in the world starts an aggressive war, there will be no legal mechanism to bring him to liability. No international court, nothing. This means if a leader starts an aggressive war and then does everything according to Geneva Conventions, so it would not be punished. It's a strange situation, and we understand that and the crime of aggressive war leads to all other war crimes. So now we are speaking about creating an ad hoc international tribunal for the crime of aggression. And Ukraine has support of this idea at the Council of Europe, which voted anonymously for supporting this idea. And the European Union, the Council of European Union also voted, they support this idea. So now we need the support of the United States to make this idea work. It will be impossible to create the tribunal with the decision of United Nations. You know that Russia may have a veto in United Nations. It has a veto vote, and without Russia vote, as one of the founders of the United Nations, no decision can be taken. So that's a problem. That means that the system of international security, which exists nowadays, is not okay. Is not okay. So we should think about new system of international security, which may prevent starting an aggressive war in 21st century in the center of Europe. So we should think about it. Let's go on. So you see the criminal cases considered by the courts during the full-scale war. This is only war crimes and war-related crimes. When I'm speaking about the war-related crimes, I speak like state treason, collaborative activities, assistance to the aggressor state, sabotage. These are done mostly by the citizens of Ukraine. And we have the suspect, and they get their responsibility. The state treason, for example, if an authority on the occupied territory agrees to work for Russian Federation, for example, to be a policeman on occupied territory or a judge, as there are some such very sad cases, or maybe a prosecutor, that is considered as state treason. And the collaborative activities, when people help the aggressor, and assistance to aggressor state. There are some few cases when Ukrainian citizens give the coordinates of military objects and civil objects to the enemy, and they can shoot their missiles correct. So we have traitors like this. So we are fighting those cases, and the people who have done it are brought to responsibility. And you see also the line breaking the laws and customs of war. 24 cases were resolved, usually heard in absentia. That means that there is no suspect in the courtroom. The suspect may be in Russian Federation, maybe on the other side of the board. So we cannot just bring this suspect to the courtroom, but sometimes it happens so when the suspect is in the courtroom, he is a captive and he is convicted for the crime. What's his destiny next? He is convicted, he gets his imprisonment punishment, for example, like 9, 10, 12 years of imprisonment. Then usually it is exchanged for Ukrainian soldiers according to cartel. So we exchange our captive soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers are exchanged for the Russian soldiers. Still, that person, that citizen of Russian Federation, he is considered convicted in crimes. So, for example, he will never get the United States of America visa. He will never get to the European Union or to other democratic countries because he was convicted for the war crimes. So he doesn't really get the imprisonment for his committed crimes. Still, he gets the status of a criminal who convicted the crime. You see the examples of such trials. The suspects were convicted for killing civilians, for raping women, and for things like this. And the collaborators and the Russian soldiers who tortured Ukrainian citizens, so they got their, they were found guilty and they got their punishment. They were sentenced to prison, but still then exchanged for Ukrainian soldiers and for Ukrainian policemen, Ukrainian authorities. I'll tell later about those cases. And the collaborative activity and the person who informed Russians about the military location. That's what I have told you about. And also there's a case of a judge from Crimea who was sentenced to 10 years in prison on breaking the laws and customs of war for the deportation of the civilian population from Crimea. So we have such cases also in the judiciary. It was a trial in absentia. She is in Crimea, so our prosecutors just cannot get the judge, but still she got her sentence. And speaking about work of the judicial system of Ukraine during the war period, during the first year of war, I hope it will be the last year of war. I hope we'll win this year. That's my hope, and I'm sure we'll do it. Yes, speaking about the work of the judicial system during 2022, there are such figures like we have considered 2.5 million cases in all courts in Ukraine and 90,000 cases in the Supreme Court. If shortly to tell you about the structure of the Supreme Court and about Ukrainian judicial system, I should say that there are 3 levels of courts in judicial system of Ukraine, like first instance courts, which are of 3 types. The common courts of common jurisdiction, which try civil and criminal cases. Then administrative courts, which try administrative cases, and I was first judge of first instance and chief justice of first instance of district administrative court. And then I was elected a judge of the Supreme Court. And third are first instance commercial courts, which try commercial cases between the enterprises and entities like private owners who do business. Then there is the second level. It's the level of appellate courts, and we also have common appellate courts, which try criminal and civil cases. And we have administrative courts of appeal and commercial courts of appeal. It's the same. Separately, there is the system of anti-corruptional court structure. This is the higher anti-corruptional court, which is just a bit out of the system, still under the Supreme Court. Well, and higher anti-corruptional court was established in 2016 as a result of anti-corruptional reform. It was established, the judges were nominated for their positions in the high anti-corruptional court as a result of an open contest on which all the judges and law professors and prosecutors could take part. And the contest commission consisted of members from Ukraine and members from foreign international organization fighting the corruption. That's why the judges with the highest integrity were nominated and appointed to that court. And now we have a high anti-corruptional court, which deals with the cases related to the top corruption. For example, corruption among judges, among prosecutors, parliamentaries, ministers, presidents, and everything like this. So they are working, and they have the first instance chamber inside the high anti-corruptional court, and the appellate chamber of the high anti-corruptional court, so inside it. And then the third level of all courts, the highest level, is the Supreme Court, So it's higher than the courts of appeal and the high anti-corruptional courts. And the main task of the Supreme Court is the uniformity of case law. So that all courts in Ukraine had the same case law, and there were no contradictions in the case law of the Ukrainian courts. So the Supreme Court consists, as you understand, of 4 chambers, and as Judge Walker has just told us, absolutely rightly, 4 chambers: the civil chamber, the criminal chamber, the administrative chamber, and the commercial chamber. And there is a grand chamber of the Supreme Court, which is much alike to the Supreme Court of the United States, which deals with the most important cases, the most complicated cases, the most important and hard legal problems, which are transferred to the grand chamber of the Supreme Court. And it also tries cases when there is a contradiction between chambers of the Supreme Court. For example, the civil chamber and commercial chamber, they are trying cases about bank legislation, and they may have different positions on the bank law on bank system. So if they have controversial positions in understanding the law, they transfer a case to a grand chamber, and the grand chamber decides how the law should be applied. The positions of the grand chamber of the Supreme Court are mandatory for all the judges and for all the courts in Ukraine. So they are very much like precedents that we have in common law system. So we see the convergence of this system, and the grand chamber is like an example for it. Besides, the grand chamber of the Supreme Court is the court of appeal for those cases which are tried by the Supreme Court as a first instance court. There are some number of cases where the Supreme Court of Ukraine is the first instance court, and then after the decision of the Supreme Court, the appeals are applied to the grand chamber, and grand chamber is the court of appeal for those cases. These cases include challenging the acts of President, of Parliament, High Council of Justice, Higher Qualification Commission of Judges, and some other cases about the highest authorities. So in that case, the Supreme Court is the first instance court, and the Grand Chamber is the last instance, like an appellate court. So I should tell about the destruction which were made to the judicial system and all the hardships that we have running judiciary during this time. You see that the level 11% of the courts of appeal and local courts do not administer justice now. Some of them are situated on the occupied territories. Others are situated on the territories where active hostilities are going on, and it is unsafe to make oral hearings and to administer justice at those courts. It's unsafe for judges, for court staff, it's unsafe for the parties and for the lawyers. So me, as the Chief Justice of Ukraine, I was given the right for the first year of law, first year of war, to change the jurisdiction of those cases, to expand the jurisdiction. So if it is impossible to administer justice in a certain court, the jurisdiction of that court is changed for another court, which is in safer situation. There is no safe place absolutely safe place in Ukraine now, because Russian fires their missiles in every city and town and village in Ukraine, just to make us be afraid. It's like a terrorism, and you know that Russia was acknowledged as the state who is a sponsor of terrorism. They're just terrifying Ukrainians, just firing missiles to civil objects, just to make Ukrainians afraid, to be afraid. They cannot win on the battlefield, so they are going taking the terrorist actions to make us be afraid. Still, there is no safe place really in Ukraine, but some places are safer. For example, in Western Ukraine, where there are no active hostilities and missile attacks are not so often as in Eastern Ukraine. So me as Chief Justice of Ukraine, I make a decision to transfer the jurisdiction of those courts which cannot administer justice to the courts which have such a possibility. And the judges from those courts are transferred to those to the courts which take the jurisdiction and continue working as judges of that court. It's not so easy often, because to get to a new court, a judge often needs to go out of occupation, and there is no legal possibility to go out of the occupied territory, because Russian troops, they do not allow our citizens to go out of occupied territories. So our citizens who want to leave the occupied territory and to live on governmentally controlled territory, they do many things to leave those territories. Like at night, they're using boats, and they even giving bribes to Russian soldiers. And the main means to leave the territory of the occupied territory is to bribe Russian soldier, so that he will allow a citizen to leave the occupied territory. So it's very difficult for judges just to go out of those territories and to go to the court where they were transferred. Some of them can do it, some of them do not take risk. I'll tell today about a judge who took risk to go out of the occupied territory. She was a judge of appeal court in Chernihiv. She tried to go out of the occupied territory together with her husband, who was a Secret Service agent at the time. And they dressed like civilians, and they took a civilian car, and they tried to look like civilians. They destroyed their documents. They thought they could leave the occupied territories, but Russian soldiers on the checkpoint, they had the list of all Ukrainian authorities, like policemen, judges, and etc. So they just shooted them, and judge was killed in place, and her husband was seriously wounded. That's the truth. But we'll speak maybe a bit later about it. So you see the courts destroyed by Russian aggression. This is Borodyanka court, the first picture. It was absolutely burned, nothing left. It was burned by a Russian missile hit. And the miracle was that the court files were located in the basement, and everything burned out except the court files which were saved in the basement. It was just a miracle. When I came there, just 2 days after liberating Borodyanka, which is near Irpin, you know, it's the most active hostilities and the most atrocities were done at that region, Irpin, Borodyanka. So that is the region. So I came there and I saw the Chief Justice of that local court, Borodyanka local court. He told me the story that everything was burned and the court files were in the basement and they were all safe. And he said, well, when Russians wanted to come into the basement, I just stood and with my body, I closed the entrance to the basement, and I told them, I will not let you in. And the court police helped them, and Russians, they didn't come into the basement. It was a miracle, but the court files were saved. Still, the court premise was absolutely destroyed. Speaking about the court premises, I should mention that Russians destroy everything they can. They loot the court premises. They steal everything. You know it from the media. They steal everything they can stealing computers, furniture, TV screens, all they can steal, and what they cannot steal, they just destroy. They shell into the video conference systems, they break the furniture, they leave mines inside the bookcases, they leave mine inside the books, safes, everything. So if somebody wants to enter the premise of the governmental body on the liberated territory, if he takes a book or open a bookcase, it will explode. So to start operating in these premises, they needed to be demined first. And there is a sad case when one of our judges, judge of first instance court, who voluntarily joined the demining team, he was volunteer, he died when demining governmental houses because of the explosion. It was explosion and he died. And we'll speak about our judges a bit later, but I'll pay your attention to the picture in the center. It's the commercial court of Mykolaiv region, my native region. You know, when the active hostilities were going on in Mykolaiv region, it was my decision to transfer that court to Odessa, to the city of Odessa. And, I don't know how it happened. It is a very sad story. Still, the Chief Justice of that court, she ordered the court staff to collect all the court files, to load them to the trucks, and to take those court files to Odessa commercial court. And they came early in the morning, and when they were collecting and preparing the court files to be transferred to another city, the Russian missile hit the building. You see what was left from the building. And it just hit the part where the court files were kept, and 2 court staff died. Others were seriously wounded. This is a very, very sad situation. And the Chief Justice, she called me, she was crying. She told me, why did I order them to load those court files? Let them just be burned, and better than to lose the lives of those girls. They were young girls, just court staff, who were doing their job, and they died in a place. Next, you see the premise of Kharkiv Court of Appeal. It is a masterpiece of architecture built in the 18th century. It was a courthouse for more than 200 years. First, it was destroyed during World War II by Nazis. And second time, then it was rebuilt, and it was finished. The renovation was finished just a year before the war with Russia began. We did everything so nice at that building. It was very beautiful. And we have 2 pictures on our website of the Supreme Court. This building destroyed by Nazis in 1841, and this building destroyed by Russians in 2022. They look the same. They look the same. That's also a very sad thing about the judges of the appellate court. You know that the problem is now in Ukraine, there is just no money for recovering courts, for repairing courts. The courts are being destroyed, and we do not know what to do. Sometimes judges use their own money to repair the courts, because our budget uses all the money for the war. We are using all the money from our state budget to fight Russian aggression. So it's impossible to restore those buildings. And at this point, I should thank the USAID program, David Won, who is present here, the representative for Ukraine. They're thinking about allocating some of money to make maybe some most important repairs in some courts. So we need billions of dollars. Still, I think we'll try to renovate some of the courts, maybe in Kyiv region. and the destruction of the courts continue. Just today, Mykolaiv Court of Appeal, it was for the third time attacked by Russian missiles. Why do they attack courts? I cannot understand. The only reason for it may be that they want the justice not to be restored on the liberated territory. The government cannot continue operating on the liberated territory. As even when they go out of those territories, they want to prevent the government and the judiciary to continue operating, to return back to the occupied territories. This is also their policy. That's why they are mining those houses, governmental houses, judiciary houses. They are firing the houses with missiles. So you see the statistics of the judicial system, 11% or 83 in absolute numbers of the courts have changed the territorial jurisdiction due to inability to administer justice. You see the red marked on the Ukrainian map, those regions where courts are not operating now. And the green on the map, those courts which stopped operation for some time because the territory was occupied by Russian forces. And then the territory was liberated by Ukrainian army and the courts restored its operating, its Kiev, Chernigov region, which I have mentioned today in my speech. This is the Crimea also, it's also occupied. It was occupied in 2014 and 15. We must also speak about judges in occupied territories. What happens to those judges? It is a very sad situation. Russians persecute those judges. They try to persuade them to break their oath and to become judges of Russian Federation. Our judges refuse those proposals. So in this case, a judge may be killed or may be imprisoned. They imprison judges, torture them to make them work for Russian Federation. Judges try to escape from those territories because they know if they do not escape, they will be tortured, imprisoned, or even killed. And I told you about the judge of appeal court. You see the picture of her car with the signs there, children, because she was traveling with the children. And people just make sign children so that Russian soldiers would not fire into that car. But that means nothing to them sometimes. And you see that the car was fired and the judge was killed. And another picture with from Odessa region, where two judges were like they lost their homes from Donetsk and they found temporarily accommodation in Odessa region. And when they were there, a missile hit that house and two judges died. And you see an example of Judge Yulia Matveyeva, who was a criminal judge in 2014 and 2015. And she tried cases about with the suspects, and she convicted Russian occupants, separatists, collaborators, all those who were engaged in Russian aggressions beginning during 2014-2015. It was Yulia Matveyeva who convicted those criminals, convicted those persons while working in Mariupol district court. When Russians captured Mariupol, they found Yulia Matveyeva, they imprisoned her, they tortured her for 7 months. After a lot of work which was done, they agreed to exchange our judge for Russian soldiers which were captives in Ukraine. You see the first photo when she was first exchanged, she was on Ukrainian territory, how happy she is crying that she is in her motherland. And the second photo, she is in the Supreme Court. I greet her and I transferred her to a Kiev court. Now she works as a judge as a Kiev district court. She is a civil judge because she would not try war crimes and the cases with the war crimes. She hates Russian occupants. And the thing she told me about the tortures in prison, how they torture women, they're just terrific. I would not tell it to you. It's just terrible things. And the third picture, you see our president, Vladimir Zelensky, awarded her with the Order of Courage for what she has done, because she got the tortures for her position and for her work as a judge during being a criminal judge in Mariupol. This is about the procedure of transferring judges. As I told you, 500 judges were transferred from the occupied territories to non-occupied territories. Not all of them can leave the occupied territories. We do not have information about all of the judges. Sometimes we don't know their destiny, but we hope they're going well and they will return to our motherland, to Ukraine. Well, I hope so. Still, the judicial reform is going on in Ukraine. We understand that we need to win this war, but we also should think what will be after the war. And after the war, we have to build the rule of law, democracy in Ukraine. That's why we go on with judicial reform. And there were some points about this reform, like to form a new Higher Council of Justice in Ukraine, which is done already in January, according to European Commission recommendations. And we are in process of forming the Higher Qualification Commission of Judges, which will help us with the lack of judges that now exists in Ukraine. New judges will be recruited for the positions. You know, the judicial reform started in 2016, then COVID-19 and war, it just stopped all the processes, but we go on. A lot of judges now have retired during this time because of the judicial reform. You know, one of the points of the reform was to vet all the judges for their integrity. So not all the judges agreed to go on through the vetting and they retired. Still, during the wartime, some of the judges also wanted to retire because not all of the judges just have the possibility to work in such terrible and unsafe situation. So we have a lack of judges now in Ukraine, and one of the aim of reform is to just appoint new judges who will be vetted for their integrity and for their professional abilities. Still, the problem in the process is, as I told you, that a lot of good lawyers left Ukraine because they lost their homes, they lost their offices, they have no place to live. Some of them are women, they have children, they are afraid about their children, so they moved to Poland, to Lithuania, to Estonia, to other countries, and we have now also a lack of lawyers. A friend of mine, a president of first instance court, she says she administers a court in the territory hardly damaged. A lot of damages were done and just a lot of destruction at the district by Russian forces. And lawyers certainly could not live in the territory, so they left for the other territories. And she says, people come to court and say, we do not have a lawyer. Our lawyer either died in the war or he is in the army, in the armed forces, because many lawyers were mobilized to the armed forces and they are fighting now in army. And they say, we do not have a lawyer, what should we do next? And she doesn't know what to advise to them because there is no just lawyers in that district. This is the problem. And that will be the problem when recruiting new judges, because many good lawyers just left Ukraine. Many good lawyers are just internally displaced persons. So I think we'll manage it. I hope everything will go okay. Still, lawyers as well as judges joined armed forces, and they are protecting our motherland. This is about the High Qualification Commission of Judges. Now it's in process. The selection commission was formed, consisting of 3 members from Ukraine and 3 members from International Anti-Corruption Organization. They formed the list of 32 candidates out of 300 applications. And next, the High Council of Justice will go on with appointing 16 members of Higher Qualification Commission of Judges, which will go on with recruiting new judges and continue with vetting of those judges who are in positions now in their offices, vetting them for their integrity, and then firing those judges which do not meet the criteria of integrity. This will be the judicial reform and a great step towards fighting corruption in the judicial system. So it's going on. You know that Ukraine was given the status of candidate to the European Union, and the European Union had a list of requirements for Ukraine, which are to be met before Ukraine may be granted the status of the member of the European Union. This is the list of the requirements which were issued by European Commission. And you know that 2 first elements are connected with judicial system. First, change the procedure of selection of the Constitutional Court of Ukraine. You know there is a Constitutional Court in Ukraine. There is no Constitutional Court in the United States. Well, I think it's more like a tradition to have a Constitutional Court. Still, Constitutional Court have some very strong power. In the US, the Supreme Court of the United States does the job like the Supreme Court and like the constitutional courts in Europe. And in Europe, we have also a constitutional court which deals with the issues concerning constitution. My opinion, it's all may be done by the Supreme Court, and most like Chief Justices of the Supreme Courts of Europe think the same, but still we have constitutional courts, and we have the requirement to reform the procedure of electing those judges by European Commission. What do they mean? They mean that we also have a commission of selection commission for those judges, but in this case, it's considered that we should have 4 members from International Anti-Corruption Organization and 3 members of Ukraine. It's widely discussed in Ukraine because some parliamentaries and scholars think this is like breaking the sovereignty of Ukraine when like foreigners form the constitutional body. Well, this is the requirement. I think if we want to like take a part of our sovereignty and give it to the European Union, so we need to like do the requirements. Still, it's a discussion. It's undergoing. The Parliament will vote for the law, I think, very soon. And other two requirements is to finalize and elect the High Council of Justice, which was done in January. And now forming the High Qualification Commission of Judges is in progress. I think me, as a member of the High Council of Justice ex officio, I'll return from the United States and we'll start this procedure. I think during May, we will finish with this procedure, and new members of the High Qualification Commission of Justice will be appointed, and this requirement will be also finished. You see, most of the requirements by European Commission are already done by Ukraine, so we hope that the process will go on soon. Yes, and I must think about our heroic judges. First, about those who voluntarily joined the armed forces. You see that 54 judges from judicial system of Ukraine voluntarily joined the armed forces, and even 4 judges from the Supreme Court. Together is like 58 judges in the armed forces. Yes, the law requires that judges are not mobilized during the during the wartime. Still, some judges just went to the recruiting centers and nobody could refuse them. They went to army and they're fighting for our liberty, including, I said, 4 judges of the Supreme Court and one of our judges, Judge Mamalu, a judge of the commercial chamber. He was 3 times awarded by an order of courage by President Zelensky. He's a sniper at the armed forces, and 3 times he did heroic deeds, and 3 times he was awarded by the Order of Courage. And a lot of court staffs you see also joined the armed forces, like more than 300 court staffs are now fighting in army, protecting our motherland. I would also speak about the judges who do not join the armed forces, but whose deeds are also maybe considered like a courage and heroic deeds. Well, I should speak about one judge, a criminal judge in Chernihiv. In times when Chernihiv is like a center of oblast, it's a city in north of Ukraine. Chernihiv was surrounded by Russian troops. It was just encircled, and Ukrainian troops just moved back, and everybody was prepared that Chernihiv will fall, and Russians will be inside this city maybe today or tomorrow. And that day, the judge continued administrative justice. He gave 100 arrest warrants for Russian soldiers, those who were brought to court to be arrested because they were captives, and we have the criminal procedural code. They did a crime, so they were brought to a judge, and judge gave arrest warrants. He gave 100 arrest warrants a day, understanding that tomorrow Russians will come into the city because the city is surrounded, and the Russians will kill him. I think this is an example of courage also by our judges. So you see judges of the Supreme Court, which are fighting in army, their photos, and in the bottom, the middle photo is Judge Mamalu, 3 times awarded by Order of Courage by President Zelensky. Yes, and those judges who do not join the armed forces, they support the armed forces. For example, judges of the Supreme Court voluntarily dedicate 60% of their salaries for the armed forces since the beginning of the war, since February last year, and the total amount of donated by our judges by this time is like 300 million hryvnias, or $8 million were donated only by judges of the Supreme Court, and 1 billion hryvnias was donated by whole judges of Ukraine. This means like $25 million were donated by judges. Every month, everybody deducts the part of his salary, 60%, and send it to the armed forces. Besides, we do a lot of other activities. You'll see, like donating blood and collecting medicine, waving nets for our armed forces, and a lot of other activities which we are doing, buying drones, buying uniform, arms, and everything like this, besides donating those money to the armed forces. That's what our judges are doing now. And also we continue the legal education among children, studying them the rule of law and democratic values, because we know it will be of a great importance after our victory. You see our judges holding the lessons of justice in school for children of the occupied Irpin, Borodyanka, and Kyiv. So that's a short brief of the situation in Ukraine and its influence of the judiciary. I can talk for hours, but these are the main things. And once more, I would like to thank everyone present here, everybody, all the Americans for helping the Ukraine. I am sure together we will win. Thank you so much and stand with Ukraine. Thank you.
Judge Walker and I will do a very brief sort of conversation in which we're going to try to ask and conduct a conversation with the Chief Justice and filter questions that I know are on your minds.
But we're not going to take very long. It's getting later.
It's going to be brief.
So,
if anyone else has to leave, if you have to leave, please do. If you want to stay, we'll have about 10 minutes of a little bit of conversation here. Okay? Right down. There.
Thank you. So you mentioned the problem of depletion of the judges and the numbers of judges, and yet you were still able to resolve 2.5 million cases last year, which is really quite remarkable. And what one comes away from this is the tremendous dedication and hard work that is being done by the judges. And I'd like you to talk, just if you could, about that, about why there is so much, what the qualities are of the judges that in effect, you supervise as the Chief Justice.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your question, Justice Walker. I think all our judges who continue administrate justice in such terrible and so dangerous conditions are also may considered heroes. You know that the missile attacks happen every day, and when we are hearing cases and we hear the air raid alert, we should stop the procedure, we should stop the oral hearings, we should all go to the basement, to the shelter, and not all the courts have shelter, only few of them, because nobody was prepared for war. The last war on the territory of Ukraine was World War II, you understand? And yeah, there were some shelters, but the years went on and nobody thought about making shelters in the court. So we all go down to the shelter if we have one, a judge, a prosecutor, a defendant, a lawyer, everyone in a small room in the basement, waiting until the air raid alert will stop. And we even have got used to it.
Right.
We read in special application on your phone from where the missiles were just launched. If they were launched from Belarus, so we have 15 or 20 minutes until they hit Kiev. And if they were launched from Caspian Sea, so we have from 30 to 40 minutes to finish the case and then to go down to the basement. That's the reality. We got used to it. We live in this reality, in this cruel reality. But what you cannot get used to is the death of your friends, the death of your neighbors, the death of your colleagues. This is the thing you can never get used to. And our judges die and lawyers die, and they die at front, and they are killed by missile attacks and everything like this. And despite of this, our judges are not afraid. They are brave enough to work in these conditions, risking their lives every day, and giving our citizens the access to justice, which is so important for every country.
Thank you. There are a lot of brave people here. I see. We could introduce your wife is in the audience, right?
Yes.
Talk about bravery, the bravery of the spouses who have to witness this. I don't know whether I caught your eye when we saw the judge on the table giving blood. So that's a picture of courage, and we'd like to introduce you. Could you stand up, his wife?
Julia.
Julia?
Julia. Yeah. Thank you. Justice is really a courage of our wives and husbands to stay with us in this difficult and risky situation. And I will also introduce my friend and colleague, Judge Vitaly Urkevich. Who is the secretary of the Grand Chamber of the Supreme Court, and we all together, we sit in a panel together, trying cases in the Grand Chamber of the Supreme Court.
I might mention Lena Huber. Could you rise so that people can see you? Lena is also a member of the delegation. I asked her today what it's like to live in Kyiv on a daily basis. Are people used to it? What are the feelings that people have? And she said, fear. We're scared, but we have to learn to live with it. And she said the practical aspects of this is that she'll walk outside and there'll be an air raid go off, a siren go off, and she has to make a decision. Can I get to work in time before the missiles hit and go into the shelter there, or should I find a shelter here first? And that depends upon what the apps say. If you've got 50 minutes or 40 minutes, you can make it maybe to work. But if the missiles are coming in from Belarus, it's a different story. So that's the life that people have to live under, and it's staggering when you think about it. I think that what you've told is a story of bravery and courage, tenacity, hard work, dedication. It's really incredible. I think it goes back to the very beginning when we offered Zelensky an exit from Ukraine. And he said, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition. And this has been continued now by the entire country, as far as I can tell. Everybody. And you mentioned something about nationhood today, about a professor that you had talked to.
Yeah, that's right. And first, I'll tell you about President Zelensky. He's really a very brave person, a very brave one. He could leave Kyiv, but this would lead to to lose the war for Ukraine. So he stayed in Kyiv, and he's brave enough. And once I was in his office, we were discussing the financing of judiciary. I need to meet President sometime to discuss those things. And there was an air raid alert, and nobody informed, just him, not me. And when I went out, our security said, well, it was an air raid alert, and the missile just flew over the presidential office. And President doesn't go down to the shelter. He's just bored of this. He just continues doing his things, and then it will happen what happened. So that's the reality.
It's a role model. You said something that I think interested us all, and I probably reflect the imaginings of the folks in the audience who are wondering about this. When you spoke of the rule of law, an essential ingredient of the rule of law is accountability. And you said that there does not seem to be an accountability to bring to justice an aggressor or an aggressive nation. If you were to design or to construct a system by which there could be a rule of law and accountability, how would you design or create this?
Well, I think the accountability for aggression, for aggressive war, should be a part of rule of law. It should be a part of rule of law that the punishment will come for all you have done. So I think that's like a part of this system, the system of rule of law. So if thinking about the design of this system, certainly we should need to have some international court, special tribunal or special court, or like the court which has the constant basis. Still, there will be the body which can bring to accountability a person who starts an aggressive war. And there is no such a body now in international law. There is just a prohibition in UN Charter to start an aggressive war, the war without reason, and there is no responsibility for it. So I think it's not a good idea. But speaking about Justice Walker question, I didn't yet finish maybe, and I'll go on what I have told today, yes, about the nation, There's a prominent history professor which talked to me. I have talked with him about the war. And he told, yes, the war is very bad. It's the worst thing which may happen in humankind, for humanity, and for the nation. But yet, a nation only could be a nation, could become a nation, only if it went through the war. And he showed me several historical examples when a nation became a nation only winning a war. So he said, and I believe his words, and I absolutely agree with him, that after Ukraine will win this war, it will be created as a nation. It will be the nation, the real nation, a very powerful nation and prosperous nation, and the nation with the rule of law.
Yeah.
What a note.
And that's a fine note.
What a
it
note.
It resonates with Americans because of the Revolutionary War.
Right, absolutely.
Can you also tell us what your vision is for the future of Ukraine?
Yes, thank you. I'm sure Ukraine will win soon. I'm absolutely sure. And after we will win, Ukraine will be a very strong and prosperous state. I think we will just finish with the corruption and all these negative things which were before the war, because now we all understand how precious is our liberty, how precious is our state and our nation, and that we should do everything to preserve our nation and preserve our state. We should do everything for our country to make Ukraine strong, prosperous, and independent state. So I'm absolutely sure that most of the people have understood and have a lesson. We paid a high price to become a powerful and a strong country. We will pay it, and we will be a strong and independent state.
Thank you.
Right. What a wonderful way to end this speech. Again, congratulations.